I guess I didn't have a specific age where I thought I would never use a booster seat again, but I thought it would be before now, I guess. Like at least on a regular basis. Like I have gone and gotten, they have, if you go to like the theater and somebody tall sits in front of you, they'll have little risers sometimes that you can get. And since I'm not tall on a good day, these are things I have taken advantage of. But as far as like regular booster seat use, I thought that was at least done in adolescence or maybe college. I don't know. When does the CDC recommend that you stop using booster seats?
It's when you're 5,
Mm-hmm.
or that might just be car seats. There's also the trope of like, shrinking into a little old lady. So it's possible that booster seats are kind of like a cyclical thing. It's
Yeah.
there at the beginning and it's there at the end.
Mm-hmm. All the world is a stage. All the men merely players, each having their part. The babe mewling and puking in its nurse's arms.
Each have their entrances and exits.
Yeah, each have their entrances and exits. That's not a bad amount of memory for me from something I read my freshman year of high school.
No, that is really impressive.
Did you know Shakespeare created my name?
Yes, I did know that.
That's it. That's all I know. And his birth date and death date is April 23rd.
No, shall we make a podcast?
Let's make a podcast.
Hello, and welcome into another episode of Gifted Kid, Messy Adult, a neurodiversity podcast, the show where potential went to die. I'm one of your hosts, Ellie Michaels. I use she, her.
I am your other host, Jessica Michaels. I use she, they.
And today we are talking about where did all of these people with ADHD come from?
Yeah, it's this article. I can't remember how it originally crossed my feed, but I was reading it, and the headline is ADHD now affects 15.5 million US adults, says new CDC report. And the author of the article is Melissa Rudy. And this is a Fox News article. Looks like Saturday, October 12th. And in just glancing at the article, it wasn't necessarily the statistics that surprised me. It says that it's about 6% of adults in the country, or 1 in 16, now are suspected of having or now have an ADHD diagnosis, and that about half of these diagnoses didn't come until adulthood. This was gathered data from the National Center for Health Statistics Rapid Survey System between October and November 2023. And I think that information was pretty on par with what I would have suspected. I think that makes a lot of sense, that right now a lot of adults are getting diagnosed, and we know that the starting point for a lot of adults is their kids. So as we're getting better diagnostics for kids, we're also finding more situations where we're following up with adults and finding these genetic links. And so the kiddo gets diagnosed, and then the parent gets diagnosed right along with them. Is there anything about those data points, 1 in 6, that surprised you at all?
No, no, it really didn't. And the sentiment of this art, there's several tone and sentiment issues that I have with this article that we'll get into, but the statistics make perfect sense.
Yeah, just the points of the statistics I wanted to address before I started ripping this article to shreds, because, um, you know, spoiler alert, I had a little bit of a problem with the tone that this article presented the information. So, in the information that I still agree with, the study found that adults with ADHD were more likely to be 50 or younger, more likely to be non-Hispanic white. Those earning less than the federal poverty level were also more likely to be diagnosed. Around 1/3 of the adults with ADHD reported taking some type of stimulant medication, but more than 71% said the prescription was difficult to obtain. And that is certainly something that I believe, I think I've switched medications after having not switched medications for years, switched medications 5 or 6 times in the past 2 years because of medication shortages. It's much less about what actually works for me and my ADHD, and has a lot more to do with what the pharmacy thinks that they can get in stock that I then communicate to my prescriber. And then we just try to find a dosage out of what's available that works, which is not a great way to treat anything, I think.
Not ideal.
Especially something where consistency is really important.
Yeah, yeah. Something that keeps you employed and housed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Have you had to change your prescriptions at all?
Yeah, yeah, a couple of times. Because there was not only just the availability, but the insane cost of certain
Mm-hmm.
medications
Mm-hmm.
were just untenable, like ridiculous. So I had to pretty much settle for, low-ish dose Adderall. And I had to jump pharmacies a couple of times to find one that was frankly under busy, because I'm not 100% if this is the case. I heard this from one person, but that there are limits as to how much of this controlled substance that the pharmacy can sell. And so when they say they're out, they mean that they're out of the legal amount that they were allowed to have. They can't order more than this much per month. And if you have more people prescribed to that at that pharmacy than this amount per month, somebody's just going to go without. So,
Yeah.
had to move from a big brand name pharmacy in a big store to a little pharmacy in the back of a grocery store that I never see really anybody at.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I would love to hear if there's a listener who knows more about this and the limits, because I've also heard the same thing about the limits, that there's a limit per pharmacy about either the number, I don't know if it's the amount of medication, like number of pills or number of patients that they can disperse this stuff to or dispense this stuff to, but also there's per license, like per prescriber's license. So there's limits that way. And then there's all the tracking. I know the state does a tracking database. And I believe federally there might be a database as well. So there's a lot of restriction that is going on when it comes to ADHD medicine. And that, which is why it shocks me how often I hear that people are just taking ADHD medicine willy-nilly, because it's like, it's so hard to get. Why somebody who was just using it for anything other than getting the executive function together to go to the grocery store, like why you would go through all of that craziness for anything other than need, I don't understand. I don't have the patience for that at all.
um, yeah, the idea that people are abusing this kind of stuff really feels like a fake moral panic. It smacks of they're giving kids gender surgeries at school. Like, that's insane by any stretch of the imagination. Like, most schools can't even give kids aspirin. Like, that's not a thing. There have been court cases because the school requires diabetics to have their insulin in the nurse's office, which is not accessible 100% of the time. And it took a lot of action to get to the point where the kid could just hold on to their own meds. Um, People taking this for recreational fun are, as best as I can tell, students, probably, rich white kids who have a hookup with another rich white kid who gives them their pills because whatever reason. But the whole thing smacks of just straight up moral panic and denying people the medicine they need because there is a group of people in this country who have a vested interest in not letting anybody have any drugs at all ever. And they are mostly insurance companies and the DEA. Um, there are guidelines to the DEA that they can't really just take a drug off of an illegal list because they just can't. It's not something that's actually meant to enforce reasonable things.
Like when it comes to rescheduling drugs, I know that there's been some discussion about rescheduling like marijuana and rescheduling other drugs, but I didn't, for some reason, I wasn't thinking that was the DEA. But I'd have to go back and look. I honestly don't know as much
It's
about
the
it.
DEA.
That is the DEA that does that.
There
Yeah,
was famously a congressional hearing with the head of the DEA, the drug czar, so that's a approachable office, where marijuana and heroin are both the same level of illegal.
Mhm.
And when asked, is one of these more harmful than the other? Because of her role and the guidelines that she has to follow, she could not answer that question.
Mhm.
Because they're both Schedule 1, they are both just as dangerous as each other,
Mhm.
which is ridiculous. And there was also specifically kind of like a memo or like a press statement that was released by the DEA a couple of years ago that was talking about how there is too much ADHD meds out there
Mhm.
and how there are too many people who are prescribed these meds and how
Mhm.
people need to basically stop being so dependent on medication.
Mhm.
And that same statement, not quite word for word, but the exact same sentiment and the exact same plan was what they came up with for pain patients a few years before that, before a whole lot of pain patients stopped being able to access their meds because someone might be abusing them somewhere theoretically, you know.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Um, yeah, and I don't want to get off. I'm gonna be careful of getting off on those tangents because we could do multiple episodes on those, and we're just getting to the part of the article that makes me angry. We've kind of hit all of the points in the article that made me that I was like, okay. Um, but then this is the sentence that tipped me off that we were going to go for a ride the rest of the article because it says around half of diagnosed adults said they had ever used telehealth to receive treatment for ADHD because this idea of using telehealth to treat ADHD is sort of the jumping off point for a whole list of arguments about how adults are overdiagnosed, people are overdiagnosed, people are self-diagnosing invalidly. Not everybody, it's basically like the neurodiversity slippery slope that
Mm-hmm.
gets us to a whole lot of bad stuff. And what I love about this is it says specifically around half of diagnosed adults said they'd ever use telehealth to receive treatment for ADHD. Well, what big event happened recently that caused a lot of us who would never use telehealth to suddenly use telehealth frequently?
It was rainy last month.
Yeah, yep, that
And we
that
didn't want
must
to
have
go
been
out,
it. Yeah,
right?
so it's this idea that, especially because during the pandemic, a lot of people who had not ever used, so this is counting people who had never used telehealth before in their lives, would never use it again, but during the pandemic, used telehealth to be treated by their physician or their whoever their prescriber is, because it says that had ever used telehealth. It doesn't say anything about regularly uses telehealth to receive treatment for ADHD or only uses telehealth to receive treatment. It doesn't say anything about use somebody other than their primary prescriber to receive treatment. It doesn't say anything about diagnosis and how that diagnosis was received. So there, it just starts with half of diagnosed adults said at some point in time they had used telehealth to receive treatment, even if that is just a medication refill. And so that kind of set my eyes to prepare to read stuff that I was not all that excited about. And here we go. The CDC reports some limits to the study. So first, self-reports of ADHD diagnosis might be subject to recall and reporting biases that were not validated against medical records. In other words, people who report that they've gotten diagnosed with ADHD might actually be recalling incorrectly or maybe reporting that in a biased way. And since we weren't able to validate that diagnosis against their medical records, we can't possibly be sure that that's true. Have you ever forgotten, perhaps, that you were diagnosed with ADHD?
I mean, not for long.
Like, it's just baffling to me that, you know, they're saying essentially that the people that we talk to can't be trusted. We can't, because we can't look in their medical report. They can't be trusted. And I get that that's going to be something that is true for any survey or for any study, unless you're turning over your medical records to somebody. That's going to be a limitation in practically any study of this nature, but it is almost never highlighted in an article or a press release, you know, or anything, unless it's part of a greater narrative of, we don't know if these people are telling the truth. You know, that's right away, that's telling you something about the bias of the article, I think, which is, they say they have ADHD. We don't know, you know, so they're just saying it.
Now, it might shock you to learn that this was originally a Fox News article. And you know the axiom, I would rather let 1,000 guilty men go free than imprison one innocent man. The two main schools of thought and philosophy in our country right now are, I would rather let 1,000 guilty men go free than one innocent man be imprisoned, versus I would rather 1,000 innocent people be imprisoned than one guilty man go free. And it's really tied to this idea of, do you deserve help, or did you actually deserve this suffering? Or suffering is good, or people deserve that. And so it especially applies to medical stuff where, you know, do you deserve medicine? Do you deserve medical care? And yes, absolutely. Everyone does. But there's a bent of people who just think, no, you don't deserve medical care. Maybe some people do, but you don't. And the thing that jumped out at me was they were talking to this medical professional, I'm sure, who said, quote, this fits into a broader phenomenon in our nation where we have become too therapized, too diagnosed, and frankly, too dependent upon people like me. You are a doctor, sir, or Matt, well, sir. You are a doctor. This is your job. If you are upset that people are too dependent on you, maybe it's because our society is built crappily and we all need help getting through it.
It's interesting that you mention this person's profession, because he is, it's Jonathan Albert, who does therapy. He has a private therapy practice in New York, I believe, but he also has other jobs. He does consulting with companies, helping notable brands strengthen their relationship with their customers. And he also wrote a book called Be Fearless, Change Your Life in 28 Days. So that is
That's medically
something
sound.
that is something that was not actually mentioned in the article, that this psychotherapist has maybe a reason to say, oh, people shouldn't go to medication first because maybe they should just go to my book that allows you to rewrite your life in 28 days.
Gosh golly, finally, you know, I guess the 30, 50 bajillion books that we've read beforehand that promise this kind of thing, now this one is the right one and will finally take care of that, right? We don't actually have to pursue real treatment for things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? You don't actually need that wheelchair. You just need to do these exercises and eat more kohlrabi, right? Right? That's, oh, all of that is fake. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Just
I
anytime someone says that you're too therapized, like you, everyone should be in therapy. Everybody should be in therapy. It's good for you. Saying that we as a culture are too therapized is saying that what, like we should be able to handle our emotions perfectly? That's what we're doing? Really? Have you met Americans?
Well, he goes on to say in this article, um, is that there are certainly those accurately diagnosed with ADHD and in need of medication. However, much like the GLP-1 phenomenon, that's like the Ozempic drugs, there's a shortage of medication because of all the people using it off-label or not truly in need of it. He told Fox News Digital. Now, I don't know what off-label uses. I've not heard of any off-label uses for ADHD medication besides treating ADHD, which would not be off-label. So I'm definitely interested to hear more about that. But it's the not truly in need of it thing, because this article goes on to say there are also many patients who don't actually have the disorder, but have been self-diagnosed through online research, according to Alpert. This fits into the broader phenomenon in our nation when we have become too therapized, which is what you mentioned, too diagnosed, and frankly, too dependent on people like me. So that quote comes in this idea that he says there are many patients who don't have the disorder, but have been self-diagnosed. Like those are mutually exclusive, that if you are self-diagnosed, then you don't actually have ADHD, because it's
Mm-hmm.
not possible to have one or the other. And he says, or you've gotten your diagnosis through online research, as if any online research, again, invalidates the mere idea that you could possibly have ADHD. That is so frustrating. So we've lumped in just right. Some people have, heaven forbid, used telehealth, and other people, boy, they use online research. And this goes right into this idea that self-diagnosis things is totally invalid. And that irks me because first we talk about the term of self-diagnosis. Now, I will agree that I worry when we publish, little bits and vignettes from the podcast, and, I put out little videos of facts, about, hey, this ADHD symptom, or hey, this autism sign, or hey, this article about gifted people. You worry that potentially there are people who will take that one little nugget that we have time to share about in a reel or in a short, may take that nugget and run a little too far with it. Like, oh, we talk about ways to keep track of your keys and I lose my keys, so I must have ADHD. But realistically, that the grouping of people who make that leap is, from my experience, very small. What happens much more typically is somebody sees that video of, oh, yeah, I forget people's names and faces, and turns out that's an ADHD symptom. And they watch then 900 more videos about potential ADHD or neurodivergence or autism or dyslexia, whatever it is. And then they read articles that they see, and then they take quizzes. They don't take one quiz, they take 5 quizzes, they take 10 quizzes. They may take the BuzzFeed version, but then they also take, this on this psychologist website and this from this society. And then they talk to their friends. And they talk to their family. They talk to their family and said, oh, remember when I was 5 years old and I did this? And the mom's, oh, yes, and you did this, and you did this, and you did this. I would be much more willing to accept that self-diagnosis was a huge problem if I didn't think that most of my clients who self-diagnose have put in more analysis hours on themselves and research about themselves than frankly, many people who've actually gone to someone and gotten diagnosed themselves. These people are not diagnosing themselves on a whim. They are really coming to this after sleepless nights and going round and round in circles, doubting themselves, going, oh, this is a peer diagnosis, often a peer-reviewed diagnosis, a family-reviewed diagnosis, and there is nobody more critical of themselves and their diagnosis than somebody who is self-diagnosed.
Quick question. So let's say hypothetically that false self-diagnosis is something that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Someone sees 3 videos and 2 memes and goes, oh, I must be ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
And then what?
Then they go to a doctor because they can't get the medication without a doctor. So they get
and the doctor goes, I don't think you actually have ADHD because of this list of reasons. You do have this problem. We'll help you with this.
Mm-hmm.
See, again, there is no actual argument here. There is no actual statement here. It is not there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you mistakenly self-diagnose, you will at some point find out that you are mistaken. And in the meantime, it does not do actual harm. But again, this is from the kind of people who have the standpoint, just because you're drowning in the pool doesn't mean that I need to get wet.
Mm-hmm.
Where your issues, how dare they impact me at all? And they don't. They don't. You don't have offices changing themselves completely around and spending millions of dollars to accommodate people with ADHD. You're barely getting any accommodations at all. This is litter boxes in kids' classrooms things. This is making something up and then being upset about it. And then people telling you that this isn't what's happening, and then you being upset at them.
I mean, this whole idea of self-diagnosis being incredibly dangerous just doesn't hold water for me. So what? So again, we have somebody who says they have ADHD and they don't. So they go to their doctor and their doctor says yes or no based on their knowledge of that patient, their own clinical understanding, their observation. And let's say that patient who doesn't really have ADHD gets a prescription for ADHD beds. Guess what? Those beds aren't going to work.
They're not going to work.
Help. There's a good chance they're not going to work, even if the person does have ADHD, frankly, because it is not every drug and every dosage that works for every person. So there's a chance that's not going to work at all anyway. But again, you've got validation that is happening at every step of the way for people. And again, this is just for people who are taking medication. This doesn't, that in this one situation, we talk about the danger of people self-diagnosing. And it's so disingenuous to me that they interview somebody who clearly has an ulterior motive without mentioning that bias.
Because fiduciary responsibility to push people away from actual functioning medical solutions to his snake oil.
Mm-hmm. To his book. He does say that the first line, the first line of treatment should be lifestyle changes and not medications. But what I'm not finding anywhere in here is any indication that people aren't doing just that. I cannot, and maybe I just don't talk to enough people, but I have not had a client come to me and say, oh, yeah, I went to my doctor and told them I needed ADHD medicine, and they just said yes. All of these things are supposed to be part of a treatment plan. And so your doctor is very likely going to be, even if they do give you the prescription for medication, you're going to be exploring lifestyle changes and other ways to manage your symptoms. Every time I go to my doctor for my medication refill, we talk about, what other things I'm doing. How much am I exercising? Am I limiting my screen time? We talk about mindfulness, we talk about meditation, and we talk about ways to try to manage when I'm overwhelmed, all this idea again that people are just self-diagnosing, going to a doctor saying, give me the drugs, getting them and going on their merry way. That's just not how it happens.
It's slaps of there are people being wrong about them being trans, where like,
Mm.
okay, this medicine is really hard to get. And if you don't have the thing that it treats, you're going to feel worse. And if you're actually suffering, if you're actually being negatively impacted by these things, you are going to be pursuing non-medical intervention things to alleviate that suffering. Hopefully
Most
you're going to be looking at our podcast, you're going to be looking at our videos, you're going to be using the free resources that people like us put out to try and limit that suffering. If you go on ADHD meds and you're not supposed to be on them, you're not going to feel better. You're not. I mean, okay, maybe you do them as like a cheap form of speed in, whenever. I always want to say like in college. It's like, well, that's because that's when you did that. Yeah, but I got a lot of homework done. There's a reason for that. Um, if you pursue these medical interventions and they don't get you better, you're not going to keep pursuing them.
Well, and what people fail to realize is they talk about lifestyle changes and ways to manage these things. Show me an ADHD person who hasn't created hundreds of systems and adaptations for themselves to get through the day. The idea of, oh, just making lifestyle adjustments to deal with your symptoms, that doesn't start the second somebody goes, oh, I think I have ADHD. That starts years and years before, when they realize, okay, I've got to find a way to get my homework done. Or
Mm-hmm.
turns out I don't remember anybody I meet. I need a way to stop embarrassing myself, whenever I meet new people, or I need a way to figure out how to get up for work on time, and so people have these elaborate rituals that they follow on. Yes, sure, absolutely. I'm always on time because I set every clock in my house 7 minutes ahead, and I set 3 alarms, and I have this different alarm clock that I put in a different room. And I ask my spouse, these lifestyle adaptations are come before the medication in almost every case, because otherwise you wouldn't get to the point where you're self-diagnosing at all, because you wouldn't be here, frankly. So
I have a feeling that if we dug out the original notes from the conversation with this, now I don't even want to say doctor, with this person, at some point they are going to say, you should just be trying harder. Are you sure you're not just a lazy person? Are you sure that you aren't just terrible? Are you sure that you don't just deserve this kind of suffering?
you could fix your life in 28 days if you really wanted to.
Well, here, give me $50 and I'll show you how. Well, if you're going to fix my life, why don't you just do that for free? Wow. So you have the secret to people being happy and not needing to rely on these drugs that we have too much, and you're paywalling it.
You could get a Nobel Prize. I mean, if
Gotcha.
you had the answer to keep all of these people off of drugs, do you know who'd be most excited about it? The people taking the drugs.
Every single one of us, every single one of us would 1000% be using that method, because I already take a handful of pills just to keep me alive. Taking more, another handful to keep me productive, not the greatest thing. But yeah, if there was something that I could see, and I'm somehow clairvoyantly realizing that this book is probably fewer than 100 pages. If in these few scant notes, the key to happiness and productivity, where it's just right there,
You know,
everyone would know.
and what really drives me nuts is that this article, when I saw this headline, I was happy because one of the things that we really do need are numbers. We need studies. We need to know more about neurodivergent populations. You know, we need to know how many adults in the US are affected by ADHD and how those people are diagnosed and how they're getting diagnosed and how trends have changed and the socioeconomic, like we need that data. You know, there's so many ways that this information could have been presented without it taking the tone that it did, without it basically saying, yeah, our headline is that 15.5 million adults in the US have ADHD. But the subtext of the article is, but we only believe part of them. We only believe like half, or most of them are like 15.5 million adults in the US are liars, is what the article ultimately says. You
Mm-hmm.
know, 15.5 million Americans are drug seeking liars. They
Mm-hmm.
could have said 15.5 million adults have have ADHD, ADHD highlighting the need for more comprehensive studies of reasonable work accommodations. Or 15.5 million adults in the US have ADHD, which demonstrates how well school interventions are working and how much more growth we could have in that particular area. Like there's just
15.5 million adults have been struggling with something and overcoming it through sheer willpower, and could be alleviating that suffering through better medical intervention, through single payer healthcare, through better access to mental health care, through destigmatizing this kind of thing, through doing the opposite of what this article is doing,
mm-hmm,
of
mm-hmm.
saying, yes, that's valid. Yes, you are struggling with this. Yes, you can self diagnose. And yes, we should try to help you, even if it's a self diagnosis, even if I don't really believe that you deserve help. Everyone deserves help. And even if they go into their doctor and say, I think I have ADHD, and they give them a test and they take the test and they go, you don't quite qualify. I don't think medication would help. Here are some things that would.
Mm-hmm.
That is the answer to this. That
Yeah.
is the answer to this problem. You can hear my air quotes, and not limit access for everybody else,
Because this,
shame access for everybody else.
it's like there's the idea that, oh, we turns out 15.5 million people are affected by this thing that makes their lives really difficult, but that's too many. Well,
Mm-hmm.
how many do you think there should be? Oh, I don't really know. We just know that this is too many people.
And you know what else, too? The vast majority of the people that they list are poor people. The vast majority. And we know that 80% of autistic or neurodivergent adults are underemployed, at least, if not straight up unemployed. And so this also smacks of straight up classism.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Those are
you.
is this sorry, I just want to make sure that I'm looking at the part that you're referring to where it says those earning less than federal poverty level were also more likely to be diagnosed, 21% versus 12.3% per the CDC. Is that what you're looking at?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
No, it's victim blaming and it's poor shaming. And if okay, statistics are a little bit fuzzy, But so far, the ones I've seen say that the percentage of people with ADHD who graduate from college, who apply to college, get in, and then graduate is less than 10%.
Mm,
If there were a group of people with a specific disability that was visible who were graduating college at less than 10%, there would be congressional hearings as
left-handed
to why
people.
this is a problem.
If left-handed people were graduating college at a rate of less than 10%.
People who need mobility devices like wheelchairs, people who need glasses, diabetic people. Like, if because this is so ingrained as just you're being lazy or you
Mhm.
don't have enough willpower or moral fortitude, this is ignored. Not
Right.
just ignored, actively suppressed and shamed.
There's so much that goes into these perceptions because you're definitely right. There's this idea, when it comes down to it, that, ADHD, sure, ADHD is real, but it's not real for this many people. It's some people actually have it. Other people just need to work harder or be less lazy, or they don't want to work. They just want to take the magic pill. Again, it's not going to do anything for them because they don't really have ADHD, but that's what they want. And it is it makes it so difficult for people who are already experiencing so much difficulty when even just a reporting of numbers casts aspersions on such a large population of people who are already struggling. And there's no reason why that has to be true.
The cruelty is the point. The cruelty is the point. That's just what little kids are like. Are you sure? Are you a doctor? Are you a therapist? Are you a psychologist? Do you have any kind of train? No, but that's just what kids are like. Okie dokie.
Those people who are laying in bed at night, not being able to sleep, thinking about how much wasted potential that they have and how they should be able to do so many things that they just can't do. And they're already giving themselves hell just for existing in a way that they don't think is right. And now we're going to add on top of that, oh, and you probably don't have ADHD. That's not real. That's made up. That is, other people have that. You don't. You don't because, you used telehealth to get that
Because you
diagnosis.
self-diagnosed, unlike the rest of us who see a psychiatrist 3 times a year. What?
Like,
Like, of course you self-diagnosed. There's no reason to go see the specialist otherwise. And because our healthcare system is so insane and broken, you can't just casually walk into a clinic and go, "Hi, I would like a appointment with a psychiatrist." Because there's like 5 of them.
there are there are always bad actors somewhere in any group,
Yes.
in any
Yes.
system.
Yes.
I am not in any way disputing that. But
Does not preclude the fact that people should be helped regardless.
so this article made me mad. I'm glad to see at least there is some discussion of more people being diagnosed, more people needing access to services and medication, more people, because the more people that we have, the better chances there are of things getting changed, the more chances that you are going to run into someone along the way who understands the things that you struggle with, the more colleagues and coworkers and people up and down the chain potentially that you might run into who could have some empathy. I'm glad to see those things. I'm glad to see the CDC is paying attention in some capacity. All those are good things.
If you don't believe in self-diagnosis, ask yourself when you would go to the hospital for a broken leg. Would you just wait for your annual checkup with your PCP and just be like, "Hey doc, I think my leg's broken. Could we take a look at that?" Or are you going to notice yourself that there's something wrong and then take yourself to the doctor with the explicit purpose of, "Hey, my leg is broken"? Self-diagnosis is not the be-all end-all, but it's a really important way to start in a country where you can't just readily access healthcare, where you need to show evidence of a broken leg to see the broken leg person. We should take a break for lunch. I'm angry.
I'm gonna have to eat lunch again.
Well, if you like our show and would like to support us, please subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast. Jess is laughing at my voice shift. You can also subscribe and rate us on YouTube at Gifted Kid Messy Adult. Hey, Jess, where can people find out more about you?
They can go to my website at coachjessicamichaels.com and sign up for a free evaluation to find out if neurodiversity coaching is right for you.
If you'd like to support us financially, you can find us on Patreon at the Neurodiverse Workplace, where subscribers get access to all kinds of bonus content, curated memes, behind-the-scenes shenanigans, voting on future topics, and you can help us keep the lights on here and at home while also helping us provide free resources and support for our fellow neurodivergent adults, because everyone deserves resources and support. If you'd like to suggest a future topic or just say nice things and give us that sweet, sweet external validation, please email us your thoughts, questions, or praise to giftedkidmessyadult@gmail.com. And you can also support us by checking out our GoFundMe to help pay for our medical expenses. So link in the show notes or just search Jess and Ellie's Fight for Health. So until next time, take care of each other out there.
Bye.